Hi, Mr. Muhamba.
How's it going, man?
All good, man. How are you doing?
Uh, as good as anyone who's Zimbabwean can be.
Yes, man. It's good to sit down with you and chat. So, okay, let's start with AI, man. Uh, we've been seeing most of the advancement that has been going on with OpenAI, particularly with ChatGPT.
Hmm.
But if we take a step back, our conception of what AI would do or how it would take over jobs, quote unquote, was maybe through people thought about self-driving cars and robots maybe doing manual tasks for us and so forth. But then now we see there's sort of a shift, and the creative industry was supposed to sort of be the last to be hit, right? Because but now everything seems to be the opposite. So what, first of all, what do you think about that? And what are your thoughts on on AI advancement and ChatGPT in particular?
Uh, I want to say before we begin, I'm not an expert on AI. I'm a
Okay.
gleeful observer. I'm just giving my opinions. ChatGPT as a company is very interesting. I think Sam Altman has been able to convince the venture capital and private equity businesses to be able to invest in this idea. I know there are a lot of people who are eating from this pie or who've invested in this pie for good reason, right?
Yeah.
Um, the concept of AI is not new. I think it's the 60s. There were early models of artificial intelligence or machine learning, whatever that branch of computing is called, right? So my first thing was, why are people surprised? It's not really new. I guess that's where you realize you are not exactly in the mainstream when
Yeah.
because my job necessitates me to look up these things, right? So as ChatGPT and what they've done with generative AI is really impressive. I didn't think it was going to be as big as it is now in terms of the kinds of things they've been able to solve through the technology is ridiculous. I mean, like people now are drafting proposals using ChatGPT, getting ideas, getting a scanning and scoping of particular areas using ChatGPT, creating content. I know we've seen, like you mentioned, the content industry was supposed to be the last,
Yeah.
but in fact, it was one of the first because people were
Exactly.
now, creating content using artificial intelligence. Even in Zim, I think Site has got an AI they have. I think Magamba also trialed out an AI. Soon ZBC will be pulling out an AI. We don't know. But in the content space, the deployability has been a lot easier because the model itself has got a lot more information to kind of learn from because user generated content as well as stuff people put there on the internet. Funny enough, even our own website, we saw that ChatGPT was calling it and Bard and whatnot before we put the paywall. So it's everywhere. It's trying to get context on a lot of things. When it comes to other industries that it does a lot of good work in terms of automation and streamlining things, things that don't typically need someone to do, a process that can be easily streamlined can be done through AI. I think development is another one where people are now crying that, oh my God, we're 10 years away from AI taking away our jobs as developers. I don't think it's there yet. I was watching this thing on Instagram where this guy was like, he saw a demo of some AI doing code, and he's like, yeah, it wasn't the best code. But again, this thing is learning. So yeah, it's impressive to see what they've done. I think the ones in immediate risk are jobs, particularly in administration, where this thing can come in and bridge the divide. More technical and hands-on jobs are going to take a little bit longer. Its introduction into stuff like robotics, I think we saw most notably Mr. Musk and his whole demo. Yes, that's one of them, but there are other companies like Boston Dynamics and whatnot who've been doing this stuff a lot longer, who would bring up more interesting applications for it. Not to say not a Musk hater, just to say
Yeah.
fanfare. Yeah, so I don't know if my points on AI make sense, or maybe if something more you wanna drill down on.
No, yeah. So let's talk about the race since you decided to bring up mass. I just kind of thought about the race between AI. So I think I was trying to think about the title of the book, but it just escaped my mind. By a Chinese tech executive, where he was talking about how China has the edge over the US because the CCP collects a lot of data, and therefore his conclusion was that China was going to win the AI race. But so what are your thoughts But this was before, the advent of things like ChatGPT and all of that. So, what are your thoughts when it comes to the AI race between the two, China and the US?
Uh, my one thing with China is that they don't, or we don't see them a lot in the media we consume. So we might not actually be fully aware of what they're actually doing. Are
Yeah,
they advanced? Most certainly. I think you can look at what they've done in aeronautics, particularly in the military applications with stealth
yeah,
fighters and whatnot. They appear to understand what they're doing, or the learning curve that they were going up. They maybe come closer to where that line plateaus. So it shows a hell of a lot of competence in what they're doing. Um, Collecting data, I think the US and China are equal in most respects in terms of the information they collect. I'll grant you that the US probably has a greater sample size in terms of the markets, because its applications are across a number of territories.
yeah,
So I'll give you an example of Facebook. There is no company that knows Africa as well as Facebook does, because you've got Facebook itself, you've got, I should say Meta, you've got Facebook itself, you've got WhatsApp, you've got Instagram.
yeah,
They've embedded themselves so firmly in how people operate their lives. Like if you look at it from the Zimbabwean context, most people who are selling online are doing so through WhatsApp or through Facebook or whatnot. And the habits they're able to pick up from people, your searches and whatnot. I mean, Google exists, but in most cases, when you live in a society that has bundles, data bundles and stuff like that, I know it's a tired old saying, but the companies that are benefiting from the most, probably Meta. A lot of Zimbabweans use Facebook. I don't use Facebook because I hate seeing other people's success and I wonder where I am in life. But you can clearly see that people are still active on
yeah,
it. It's a fantastic gateway. People do live streams, stuff like that, whatever the case might be. So it's companies like that that are US based that have got a ridiculous amount of information on what we have, even mobility. I remember that check-in thing on Facebook where you used to check in at a specific location. I think they have that data
yeah.
of our movements and travels.
Of
And
course.
who have they got? Who are they selling it? Google, for example, your Google Maps is it, as much as you think you are asking it things, it's asking things of you as well, of where your present
Exactly.
location is, whatever the case might be. I know there's settings so you don't get your location saved, but are we really sure that it's awful? It's just day by day.
Yeah, just
So
like the recent scandal with Ignito,
yeah,
where it turns out they're actually tracking
you see.
users. So
So it's
yeah,
the US has got a considerable in terms of tech development, in terms of the companies they've spread across the markets so ridiculously, and in untapped markets like Zimbabwe, Africa, where a lot of things are unknown. Particularly user habits are unknown, but I think Meta has got a really, really intuitive understanding of where Africans spend their time. I have not seen Chinese apps, at least in my own experience. I won't speak for everyone. I thought WeChat was going to be a thing in Africa. Didn't turn out to be. WhatsApp kind of scuttled that. I don't consume many others. Maybe if we're looking at people who are shopping on Shein and whatnot. Again, this is just from my experience, right?
mm,
But US versus China in terms of collection of data through companies, if they are offering it to the US government at whatever cost, or if they are using it internally for their own development of products, I think the US might have a slight edge. But that's just because I'm more exposed. I've encountered more US based tech than I have Chinese based tech, if that makes sense.
okay. So I mean, speaking about the US, we know Zuckerberg has. I've lost count of how many congressional hearings he's had, and over also sources of cases, but more so on the antitrust side of things. So, like you said, they wield so much power. They know so much about people's lives, and there's been so many scandals surrounding Facebook. One that comes to mind is the Cambridge Analytica with Trump in his 2016 bid. Apparently, Facebook was used by this consultancy, Cambridge Analytica. They have is most of the data on Facebook, and they were able to convert votes and all of that. So, but I mean, you also mentioned within that case, there also are the African countries that came up. Um, I'm just forgetting the specific countries, but what does that mean for our national security in Africa? All right. So if we have all these, yeah, I know there's talk about U.S. meddling, let's not say the U.S., but other foreign nations meddling in other countries' affairs, right?
Hmm.
In the Africa, it's the West and the East and everyone else, right? That we sort of try to protect ourselves from. But but no one seems to ever discuss social media as another sort of threat.
Mm.
So, what are your thoughts on that?
National security, when it comes to Africa, for me particularly on digital, it's frustrating. Point number one, African governments did not see the digital age coming as far out as other governments had. I mean, the internet was a thing, I guess, in the 90s. I was a kid, so I wouldn't really know. I think our first dial up was in 2001. I don't know if it was telco, whoever it was gave us dial up at the time, but the internet was, they did not see, or at least didn't project that far enough into the future to see the implications of a greater connectivity to the world instantaneous. An example is, let's give you some, one of the reasons why postal and courier services fell off as they did is because companies no longer needed to send letters between offices and between buildings, right?
Yeah.
You could do that via email. All that documentation that had built an industry was now online, right? Although people relatively, what's it called, turned to online at slower rates than others. Some are still in the dark ages, which is fair enough with them. My point is, they didn't project far enough. They didn't keep their finger on the pulse to see far enough on the impact of the internet, particularly when it comes to social media. The crazy thing about social media, at least from where I see it, it's user volunteered information, user generated content. People are more than willing. It's weird when you create a product, and I don't know what market research the guys at Facebook, whoever was running social media at the
Yeah.
time, did, but to create a product where someone would willingly give up vital information about who they are, where they are, etc., 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 right? I mean, in the 90s, it might have seemed ridiculous. Like, why would someone want to give up some of their
Yeah.
privacy? But when the product came into the market, people were like, oh crap, we can then communicate, converse. I know everyone's got their particular use for it, maybe it's communications and whatnot, whatever the case may be. But the parts of yourself that you let go out have allowed companies out there to build a comprehensive user profile catalog of countries, of these sort of people live here, tendencies, etc., etc. There's a whole psychological aspect to
Yeah,
information that you
but
get.
isn't that interesting? Like, I feel like that's like probably the dream of every single intelligence agency
It
back
is.
in, like, for you to be able to get this information from people
Mm,
without coercing them, right?
exactly.
Without having to take them to, a black site or whatever.
Yeah.
You
The
just They literally share that information. Um, so what do you think? I mean, people have the various theories on this, but do you think there's any kind of ties between these companies and the intelligence agencies? It might be an obvious thing, but
it's not an
I'm
obvious
I'm
thing, right?
I'm I'm interested in your thoughts on
I
that.
mean, the one thing I understand about at least my own perception of the world is, as much as you might try and assume that they are not doing it, if there is some causal link for them to work together that is mutually beneficial, because remember, this is a business. If it makes sense for them on a business perspective, they would do it. Do they need to publicize it? Probably not, right? I think the case of, remember that iPhone thing where Apple refused to unlock some person's iPhone and
Yeah,
what they'd
yeah,
done and whatnot, and we saw that battle play out very publicly. That might be one of those cases where it's playing out publicly. How many behind closed doors situations like that have happened that we don't know about? How many have they said, oh, okay, cool, yes, to, if they got some certain sort of concession or whatever? I'm not saying they have done that, but I'm saying from a business standpoint, if you're
yeah,
getting something to benefit from that, why not? I think we all watch The Social Network. Not
yeah.
to disparage Zuckerberg,
Oh,
because
yeah.
he is clinical. What I respect about him, he is clinical. He's got drive,
Yeah.
but you could also assume, again, the word is assume, that if an offer comes up of something that he wants that he didn't have access to, even though he's a man with all the money in the world, and there's something that he particularly wanted, and there's a relationship, however unsavory you want to call it, I assume that it's something that he'd consider. Whether he'll do it or not is something I really have no idea. But I would say we don't know a lot of things about what happens between governments and these companies behind closed doors. What plays out publicly might be political theater or just them trying to show their resolve. But yeah, there's a lot that we don't know. It's a lot of
Yeah.
assuming.
Yeah, I mean, Neil Postman probably nailed it. He said, technology is a Faustian bargain. It gives and it takes away. So in the case of social media, it's, you get to connect with Facebook in particular. The selling point is, you get to connect with all your friends and all the people that you know that are across the world. Um, but, in return, you give us your data,
Yep.
right? Um, let's go back a bit. I mean, I just recently, wrote something along the lines of us being technologically reliant First of all, what do you? I know you liked that post. I don't know if you read it,
I read it.
but what do you think about the idea of us being, technologically reliant? It's always difficult to speak about Africa because there's so many countries, and then again, you don't want to.
Mm.
But I'm just gonna say, as Africa, what do you think? Do you think it's important for us to maintain that kind of, self-reliance on the technology front? And like you're saying, how do we get on top of the trends? Because in most cases, we kind of always have to wait for something to be discovered
Mm.
in the in the West or in Asia or whatever, and then we sort of iterate our own version. But how do we actually, g- get in front in terms of actually inventing our own things? And
So technology reliance using digital technology, right? Or just technology in general.
well, I think, yeah. Let's see. Let's just broaden it up
So
for interest sake.
I think technology. When we say technology, I think we're looking at things like the internet and smartphones, and as much as they
Yeah,
are, right, the clothes you're wearing, a
yeah,
massive industrial process went to make sure that you wore the clothes that you're wearing.
exactly.
The electricity itself, there are countless people who are working right now to keep the lights on, right? That forms of fire itself, I guess, is a form of technology.
Yeah,
So when we speak about technology, it's all around us and we're reliant on it, and it's made our lives significantly better. Medicine is a technology that has increased
yeah,
lifespans by considerably more. We would not have made it to the ages we are now if we were living 1,000, 2,000 years,
yeah,
even let's say 200 years or 100 years
yeah,
previously. So technology, we are very reliant on technology. When it comes to digital technology, I think I'll kind of meld the second question and say I think we have given up a lot of our sovereignty. Um, One of the key reasons why is we don't, as Africans, invest in research and development. I know
yeah,
we have more pressing problems, like if you live in Zimbabwe, electricity, water,
yeah.
etc.
But aren't those pressing problems supposed to be solved in that respect, right?
Yes, I think the natural progression of things is is supposed to be you solve the key core problems, then you move on to other problems. But if you're looking at Africa, and let's be honest with one another, the scars of colonialism have not left us. The scars of neo-imperialism have not left us. We are a people that are healing. That's not an excuse because we should be able to now, with the domains we now command to whatever degree, because there is
Yeah,
influence regardless, right, of other nations that have interest in what you have and what etc. But it's not being myopic in terms of having blinders on and saying, we're not going to look elsewhere because we've given up a considerable portion of our personal and continental market share to companies who don't have headquarters here or who don't pay taxes in local countries, in African countries, right? Zim, for example, like we don't have a Facebook or a Twitter or whatever headquarters here. We're a very small market. We're a fraction of a fraction of what they have. But the information we give them is ridiculously valuable. It's the best ROI ever
yeah,
for Africa. I don't think they've got headquarters in Africa, right? But not as numerous for a continent that's, if not one of the biggest. And
yeah,
with a growing population, the youngest population, I think we between 20 and 25, we've got the greatest proportion. We're projected to be the most populous continent in the very near future. So it's the ROI for them to put up a website, what they've done, obviously. The ROI they're getting from Africa in terms of we're not giving them equal competition in these spheres for the resources they're putting into the continent. I know, Facebook has done a lot of undersea cables and stuff like that. Fantastic. Google's done the same in terms of connectivity, but that is towards their net benefit. The more people are connected, the more they have users for their products, right?
yeah,
So it's a win-win for them. But on a continental perspective, I don't think we have invested enough money and time into research and development. I don't have the figure. I remember my editor Farai was talking about the figure of R&D that Africa does. It's ridiculously low. Like we are we are so low in research and development, and that goes to the next point that you asked about. How do we catch up to what's going on? In terms of, let's just look at the world of computers broadly, not specifically. We are so far behind, it's painful. Like we have companies locally in Africa. I mean, we'll speak of Zimbabwe since we both live here. They can't compete with what's going on with other products that are coming out. The culture of research and development, particularly from an investment perspective, investors out there are more than happy to put money into ideas because they want to own the future of what's happening, right? You saw with Facebook, they went heavily into augmented reality and virtual reality because they thought it was going to be the new way of computing. They bet hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, on that bet, right? Whether it comes good or not, it is what it is, right? But they've, again, it's not just putting money into a process or by trying to buy the future. In the process of doing that, you learn a lot of things that you can actually implement, right? In Africa, and I'll speak to Zim, we put most of our money presently into property, into mines. Great, right? But again, you don't have, we're not going to have the leverage in terms of digital. Because right
Yeah.
now, Starlink has not necessarily disrupted ISPs in Zim because Starlink is predominantly for rural locations. We've seen Harare being sold out and speeds looking terrible. People might say I'm getting 150 megabits a second, but their latency is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
The local ISPs, I think only Liquid shifted their model to now charge you for speed instead of data. That's the furthest we've come in terms of movement. Now, fair enough, companies like that obviously have more in terms of infrastructure. If the infrastructure cost is higher than Starlink because they're just simply using the same infrastructure to cover a large geographical area, which is the whole world, or their selected markets. But it's stuff like that where we don't have the resources of the investments are going into the primary sector, which is all fair and well. It would be better as a smaller side if we were investing in value addition, if we're not just exporting ores or the primary components themselves, if we're actually exporting finished products, of which Africa is produces the least. I think there was a stat when I was in Namibia, the AFCFTA, the MSME forum, where they said of the total trade Africa does, I don't know if this number is correct, but this is what I remember,
Yeah.
20% is into Africa. So
Okay.
we've got a trade problem, we've got an investment problem. Nothing is helping. It's trying to make these 2 points make sense. We're not leveraging enough for us to catch up to any trend, not even technology.
Because it brings me to something that I just thought about. I always heard this phrase. Africa is the future, but I always felt like that's an incomplete statement. The future of what exactly? And so I just recently posted something on my status. I was like, there's three possible ways to complete that statement. It's either Africa is the future of cheap labor. Africa is the future of global consumption.
Mm.
Because we're essentially, China is doing this thing. The sort of neo Silk Road, the Belt and it's called the Belt and what
Mm.
the road initiative that they're doing,
Mm.
right, to connect the world to the rest of China. It's they're essentially doing the modern Silk Roads, and what they're essentially doing. So this idea, I think I ran across some quote that was saying like, countries don't have friends,
Mm.
they have interests, right? And those interests can expire
Mm.
depending on whether they've accomplished. But we as Africans seem to have this idea that we have a certain awe with the friends or what, but we all know that's not true. But I guess I lost my train of thought. But I was gonna say, so what do you think about the what the future of Africa looks like if we neglect all these things? Because it doesn't seem to me that we're actually preparing. And at this point, when we talk about digital, it's not really the future; it's the present,
Mm.
and we're ignoring it, and it's moving towards a certain direction. Where does that leave us if we don't kind of invest in digital as your digital infrastructure as you're putting in?
Ah, the future of Africa thing is interesting because you said the future of Africa could be cheap labor. Uh, Manufacturing in Africa is ridiculously expensive. We'll speak of Zim as the case study. I don't see anyone coming to open up a factory unless they're at a mine that is refining
Yeah.
something and it makes it easier for them. Our logistical infrastructure is as great as some of it is, not all of it is there. Zimbabwe is a pivotal, country in the north-south corridor. We should have an expressway that connects Beitbridge or wherever people are coming from with Chirundu and with other border posts to ensure that products are going where they need to go. Um, these are some of the problems they say Africa's the future of, or Africa's dawn. We're always told that recurringly. Africa's supposed
Yeah.
to Africa.
But it's interesting to me that that statement, in some cases, is left like that. Like Africa is the future. So you could essentially, it's sort of an
Yeah,
open-ended, statement. So it's very interesting.
yeah.
But yeah, you can.
Yeah. It's frustrating to think about because um, you look at initiatives like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as an example, and you see that we are going to be the biggest trading bloc in the world in terms of just by landmass and countries and whatnot. I mean, bigger than Europe in terms of just the number of countries participating. Um, we're going to have a unified payment system with a Pan-African payments and settlement system, right? That is going to unify all of the things that we're supposed to be doing. To your phrase, Africa's future is hopefully unity, is how I would end it. To say we need interruptible ways of accessing one another. So what I really love, and I might be going besides the question, but I'll come back for you to rephrase it.
That's right.
But it's, if you look at the Southern African Customs Union, I think it's South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini. They've got a fantastic relationship, right?
Yeah.
I know South Africa leverages a considerable amount of that because they're the manufacturing hub. But if you look, for example, I think a third of Namibia's revenues as a government comes from SACU. That's ridiculous for them to be able to. I mean, Zimbabwe was part of SACU back in the day when it was still Rhodesia, I think, and then we stepped out after the UDI, Universal Declaration of Independence in 1960. Kind of screwed us over because if we had still been part of it, we would have probably been in a better place, right? But unity in terms of, like you said, countries don't have friends, countries have interests, right? That there's a self-interest within that because of location, ports, consumers, and whatnot. There's a lot of interest that's going on, and I thought the African Continental Free Trade Area model would be built on SACU, which is the oldest customs union in the world. It's the oldest. They would have learned lessons from what SACU had done and been able to unify the small region in Southern Africa. I know there are other trading blocks that exist, COMESA, ECOWAS, SADC, whatever, right? But sustainably, those guys at the southwesterly part of Africa have been able to keep their little, not even little, it's a massive business, keep their enterprise going for so long. And they understand and they're able to communicate and be able to trade in terms of interests that suit them. Recently did a piece, I don't know, it came out yesterday, about Botswana's significance in South Africa's automotive industry. They own 50% of the wiring harness business for the automotive industry in South Africa. But that relationship only exists because of that close bond and that interest in SACU, and also Botswana having a lot of pushing towards their own version of industrialization. So in terms of unity, if we can't agree amongst ourselves, if we can't say, yo, let's work towards a common good, if we don't find a single interest in common to say, okay, we've all got our different problems, however, we want to unify to solve this interest that I think we all have, or even simply polling all the heads of state, say, what is the most pressing problem that we can all share in common, and how can we work towards getting that thing done? Fair enough, right? But again, we don't have that commonality because, pure example, it's you've taken, how many direct flights do you know from point to point in Africa? You have to go through OR Tambo, Kigali, Nairobi, Ghana, or what's it called, or whoever, right? That simple ability to transit across the continent is complicated and expensive, right? But it's to everyone's interest because you are getting expertise, you're getting business, you're getting all of this going up and down. And if we're not able to find commonality or a single interest that we can say, let's benefit on this one thing, then Africa's future is ... still.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, speaking of collective action, I think we spoke earlier about, different governments trying to get, accountability from these big tech companies, Facebook being our target in this conversation. But there's also, in when we speak, first of all, well, two questions. First one is like, what sort of collective action can we take as a continent to kind of hold these big tech companies accountable? Because you did say there's also stuff that is happening on these platforms, whether it's to do with election manipulation or whether it's to do with human trafficking or all sorts of things. How do we, you know, um, how do we sort of confront that, or do we unionize, for lack of a better word, to kind of hold these companies accountable? And when we talk about data protection, we also have, in Europe, it's the
GDPR.
GDPR, right? And how can we also kind of, develop our own frameworks to this, and sort of not, also be not just remain as spectators, but actually be involved in the shaping of the digital, village, as it is
I think
often
it goes back to what
called.
you said about interests. Give you an example. We're going to leave names out of it.
Okay.
You have a country that you run. I have a country that I run. You tell me, like what you're telling me now, yo, I think we need to form a common bond so we can hold these tech companies to account, right? Your country is relatively successful. My country is not, right? There's a big tech company, let's call it tumblers.com, that is a social media platform. And we say to them, yo, I think you guys need to be held accountable for all of this. We want you guys to start paying taxes and whatever, because we're giving you a lot of information, whatever. I know there's VAT. My country, my fictional country, we collect VAT, but we want you guys to have a presence, right? And, Jabula's country shares the same sentiments. My country is not doing very well. And, I'm with you on this. And then the country where tumblers.com comes from says, oh, okay, cool. I see you're trying to pressure one of our companies, whatever, right? I mean, we did have like $1 billion of aid scheduled for you guys, but we feel like, you know what, we'll pull it back because we're sensing a bit of friction. Nothing personal, it's business. We wanted to align goals and aims and whatnot. And I'm like, you know what, but like my country's got 300,000 people. I can't let them go hungry. And right now, production is not at a level where we can forego the say that's coming from board. Then I come back to Ninja, I'm like, bro, listen, your idea was great, but I've got stuff at home that I can't, whatnot. To be frank with you, yeah, sure. There's this thing, this aid package that we're expecting, alleviate situation. My country's got a hell of a lot of poverty and etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, so it's interest. If GDPR only works and can hold them account because most of the European continent is saying, "Oh, we want you guys to run through this. This is our one point that dictates how you operate with the rest of us."
Yeah.
Right? But because you don't have quote unquote third world countries in Europe, the EU has given the bloc a net good in terms of net positive in terms of movement of people, goods, and business, etc. So they are willing to say, I don't receive aid from anyone. We have to make you accountable. Like when Google and Facebook are paying ridiculous fines in Europe for specific things that are not changing, Apple having to go to USB-C
Yeah.
because of that power comes from everyone, interests being that whole point, but interests being aligned. And no one can leverage the gaps between us. You can't find any cracks between all of us because what we're saying is it's for the common good. So I hope that answers
Yeah.
how
In
we
other
can't
words,
get
we're,
paid.
we're screwed. That's all you said there.
No, we're not screwed. We're not screwed.
No, no,
We need to again identify areas of commonality because Africa is not a small continent. I think we're a
exactly.
billion people or close to.
Yeah.
We're not insignificant. We are a sizable market, but we need to act like it. We need to begin to act like it, to being like, yo, this is not a
Yeah.
Valentine's country decision. This decision was made on behalf of the people of Africa by the Inter-Organization of Valentine and Jabulo's countries, or the Organization of Valentine and Jabulo's countries unity. That made the decision, and we think it's for the common good. And they
Yeah.
can't find gaps between us. I mean, even in a situation where the aid is whatever, yeah, I mean, you're not dealing with me on this case. You're dealing with them. They regulate down to us. If that was the unified agreement, or if that even makes sense. I hope the analogy makes
No,
sense.
no, no, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. So and then I guess it also takes me to my next question, which is that I've always also thought about like how we approach our interactions or our foreign relations. It seems we always come across as beggars. So you know how people respond to beggars, right? And when I was talking about technological self-reliance in that article, I was also trying to hint at us actually bring something to the table, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
So that when we come to the table, we actually have something to say and we're not treated as as beggars. But how do you think we get to that point? And first of all, do you also buy into the idea of like unification of Africa, a la Gaddafi?
The United States of Africa. I I think it's an interesting thing to think about. As a hypothetical, it would be really interesting because if we are all under one banner, as the United States was, as the United States is, sorry, that could be crucial to how decisions are made. The problem with that is, even in Zimbabwe, we have tribalism, right? Um, us being able to see that decisions made for 1 billion people. I mean, America's got 300 million people, and they've got sovereign provinces or sovereign states that deal with their own specific issues. If the model looks like that, maybe. But my question is, do people who currently the 50 odd heads of state, do they want to cede
Yeah.
power to something bigger? If they do, that's a very interesting experiment for us to try. But
Yeah,
if they
but I've
don't,
also just thought about it. I think, yeah, so yeah, I mean, besides like the language dynamic, there's also a religious dynamic. I was just looking at a map that shows like, the division between, Christianity, Christian nations and Muslim nations,
Mm.
and I think that's another factor that would make it a bit difficult.
I don't think religion as a divide. Now, I'm being purposefully reductive, if that's the word,
Mm.
reducing I don't think religious divides are. I know in other areas they're stronger than others in terms of Christian versus one. I read somewhere where I don't know which country it was. I don't want. Let me say Sudan. I don't know exactly where they're saying Christians have to pay a tax to pray, whatever it is. I don't quite remember. But if you can pull it up, you can
Yeah,
check it out. Yeah, there are some places where those tensions are increasingly high, and it's a valid point. The religious divides will be a problem, but then there are also examples of secular countries, even countries that call themselves Christians, where we live relatively in peace and we respect each other's beliefs and stuff like that. So,
but I feel like it's different though. If like America is typically viewed, for instance, as a um, as a Christian nation,
mm,
right? You might have, there's obviously religious liberty enshrined in the Constitution and all of that, but demographically speaking, you probably have, more, and it's the so it's like if someone is being inaugurated in America, they have to touch like a giant Bible
mm,
and so forth. So I feel like the dynamic would be different now if you're trying to unify, countries that where that kind of religious divide is blatant. So then it's like, okay, whose moral code, so to speak, do we kind of use? I mean, there's universality when it comes to like the moral code itself, but like whose practice do we follow? If you get what I don't
I
know.
get
I'm
what you
just
mean, but
yeah.
I don't think it needs to be this or that,
Okay.
because we. Okay, I was watching a video. I don't remember who the guy was, and he was saying, "Why don't we touch the Constitution when we swear an oath? Because it's not our greatest oath to the nation, which is represented by this codified set of rules that govern us all. Why must it be the Christian Bible, right?" So for me, it's like, yeah, if Africa can create a constitution, and regardless of your religious beliefs, you're in your capacity as a public official and as the
Mm,
civil servant, if despite all our differences, if your common goal is with these principles that we have all said
yeah.
we agree upon, right? If you swear to that, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I think that is probably the easiest way to do it. We don't necessarily have to say it. Africa is a this religious continent. We just have to say Africa is governed by. I mean, that was the inception of the United States, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't built as a Christian nation because what they were trying to escape from was monarchy,
Yeah. And
the
also,
US.
this idea of, state
Separation of state and
and
church.
yeah,
But again,
separation of church.
it's
Yeah.
like I keep saying to my I have a group of friends who we follow American politics religiously. In uni, we actually used to stay up all night watching the election races and stuff like that. And I remember giving them this essay by Thomas Paine, which many people think push forward the revolution because the revolutionaries themselves at some point were afraid to utter the word
Yeah.
revolution. And you can clearly see he's not holding back when he says this. I'll send it to you. You can take a read. I forgot which one it was because Thomas Paine was involved in quite a bit of things back in the day. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's that separation of church and state was from its inception. They understood the power religion had over people, and they wanted to make sure that the arena of the state is a different thing. But now, in God we trust, I solemnly swear on holding a
Yeah.
Bible. It's I don't know how that changed, but they've been a country for 400 years or 400 odd years. Things are likely to shift.
But like, but isn't America like the greatest nation right now? Like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of criticism of America, but I still feel like um, things work there. You know, I don't know what your take on that is, but
America is there is no good without bad.
yeah,
There's no purely good country. There's no purely great country because we all have our pros and cons. From what I do, America is the greatest incubation and experimentation environment.
exactly.
I think Britain was that before. The British Empire did a lot of innovation, physical and otherwise. The United States became that incubation of all the best minds came
Yeah,
to the United States to test themselves. The universities are among the best in the world that push out some of the greatest minds in the world. I think they have a monopoly on Nobel laureates in a number of fields, right?
yeah,
So as an incubation hub for progress, they've proved that that model works. right?
Exactly.
And they've developed so many products that we all use internationally. Although, there's some interchange here and there, but I was reading this book by Professor Galloway. It's called The Four. It's actually on my desk.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Galloway. Yeah,
Galloway and Pamoromo, but he's a good dude.
yeah.
He's
He's
a
a
good
good.
dude. He was saying America is the place that gives you second chances. A
Yeah,
place where if you have enough resolve, you can come back. I'm paraphrasing,
yeah,
but you can come back and give you a second chance. And we see that in America's venture capital. How many enterprises have they invested in that have not come good?
yeah,
Besides that, look at government spending back when they're doing the space race. That was pure propaganda. There was no reason for us to go up there in the first place, just to stand on something, right? I know there's scientific purposes of collecting
yeah.
samples and whatnot, but the science was behind the geopolitical fight between the USA and USSR. Neil deGrasse Tyson said it very well.
Elon is booing you right now.
I know. I'm not a big Elon fan, but we'll get that in a
Okay.
bit. But if you look at the amount of money that went into development of the sciences from a government perspective, because like, remember, government doesn't have ROI.
Yeah,
They don't have return on investment. For them, they have an interest, like you mentioned earlier,
yeah,
that they want to accomplish. And in this case, in terms of technology, it was geopolitical to make sure that America continued, I think, post World War II, continued to be ahead of the curve in terms of technological development, of which we've seen in general terms on a
yeah.
number of spheres.
There's been quite a lot of, especially post World War II. I think the preoccupation of the United States was to make sure that they maintain their edge. You know, post rather, post World War II, just to make sure that they maintain their edge. Across the board. So politically and also technologically, like you're saying. And interestingly enough, some of the greatest innovations that we see today have either been developed, through like the military, DARPA, or there was some kind of government grant involved. I know the National Science Foundation probably funded Google at some point
Mm.
early on, their first algorithm, if I'm not mistaken. And you also had like, technologies like the touch screen coming from DARPA's research and all of that. In fact, most things on the first iPhone. But the point is like, um, when we come here, the idea is always that, government should stay out of, the space. It should be private sector led. But then you also, like you're saying, government probably has a lot of more risk appetite than companies because, companies are trying to cut down on costs, so they'll always find shortcuts.
Mm.
So what do you think our government should do in that respect for us to maintain that edge, for us to actually, also take part in this in
Uh,
in the in the race and
I
not be
mean,
spectators.
we're going to be spectators for a while. If you look at the U.S. government's model, like you said, a lot of risk appetite. I don't think it's risk appetite. It's more they wanted to maintain that prestige, and there is no, like I said, ROI on prestige, right? They're not looking if you blew through $6 billion to get no result. What else can we salvage from it? And if you look at America's military, how many multi-billion-dollar projects have been scrubbed because it did not meet specifications, or Congress was just like, this is getting too expensive. But the money's already been spent. The lessons learned themselves have been obviously retained and been given to other applications. As for our government, um, the starting point would be doing the very simple things. Society, like you were in the US recently, and you understood how well the country works, right? You get to a point where you get the sense of privilege where you don't see the utility companies, what they're doing, the road and works and whatever, even if, America's infrastructure grade has gone down according to some commentators over the years. But the ability to keep a veil over the things that are supposed to happen or are supposed to be there, I think that's a start. And there's a lot of innovation in that because we can innovate on the electrical grid or whatever within the context of the troubles we've seen. That's a
Yeah,
form of research and development, right? To say what best serves. Can we go? Are we going to do mini grids? Are we going to roll with all this kind of stuff? I know I'm just rattling off buzzwords in energy, but we can create something within our own context. The cost of doing that will be considerably high because our systems are based on British colonial systems and whatever add-ons we've gotten from partner nations. But again, that's a starting. That's where you begin that practice of research and development. To be like, yo, we know this is a problem. We want to put money to solve this problem. Again, even in the United States' perspective,
yeah,
the whole space race was we don't. After Sputnik went up and they saw Russia had the first orbiting object, and the first person in orbit, and whatever. They're like, we need to solve this problem, right? And
yeah.
we're
We
willing
need
to
to do that.
invest that money. If we take the NASA example and we take our utility example, I think the underlying principle is the same. We need to
Yeah.
start investing more in solving problems, and investing more time in finding innovative ways in solving problems that make it easier for us, or are built within the context of our own experiences. Because things are only the way they are because that's how they were left, right?
Yeah.
If someone really pokes holes at stuff, you could eventually find a more interesting way of doing things, or a more efficient way of doing things,
Yeah.
or a more continent-based way of doing things.
Yeah, maybe let's also break down like what innovation is. Like you said, most of these things end up just being buzzwords, right?
Hmm.
So, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think innovation has to at least, if something for something to qualify as innovation, it should at least fulfill three criteria, right? Should be new, should solve a problem, and it should add some value.
Hmm.
So what do you think about that? Because we throw these words around, especially like at innovation hubs. Yeah,
Okay.
cool.
So you said innovation needs to be new, needs to be solving a problem, and needs to create value. Execution is also a way of saying something is new, because if you execute something in a different way, if someone, for example, is example that I like in my head is ERP systems and accounting software and whatnot.
Yeah,
Sage exists, but now we've got QuickBooks and whatnot. The execution is vastly different. They're looking at cloud, and they're looking at
exactly.
being adaptable and being more nimble for organizations that don't want the burden of having such a massive piece of tech on their business. So yeah, innovation for me, I would agree with those points in large part. But for me, it's adding another element, which is context.
Okay.
So you can create software, but if it's not contextual to the people that are using it, then there's no point. The
Yeah.
only way something that's not contextual can take roots in the market that they need it is if there's critical mass. For example, with WhatsApp, there's really no need for me to get what's it called Telegram, right? To use it more often, because most people that I know have a WhatsApp. So that the number of people that use it necessitates me to use it as well, right? And those are very fortunate examples of companies that have built products that, by just sheer numbers
Yeah.
and sheer clout and whatnot, and in some respects marketing, we're able to catch on to markets where they might not necessarily have been useful. For me, in the local context, and this is predominantly where I work, is helping companies build products within context. I don't see a lot of that happening. We're doing, and I'm not saying for everyone, I'm saying from what I've observed, and maybe because I'm out on the inside, I'm not seeing it, but from my experience, it has not been building it with the mind of the people who are going to use it. I'll give you my favorite example, Sasai. It should have conquered Africa as WeChat, or at the very least Zimbabwe, because for a very long time it was one of the cheapest platforms to use
Yeah.
message and all that.
But what do you think happened there? Because okay, okay, let me set it up. Because I know there's Moya in South
Mm,
Africa. I know there's Ayoba
mm,
by MTN, and they have a substantial amount of users. What do you think happened to Sasai? Because that, like you're saying, I mean, they had all their sister company was a telecoms, one of the biggest in Zimbabwe, or the biggest rather in
mm.
Zimbabwe. So what do you think happened there? What's your
My assumptions are this. I think the whole critical mass thing is important. There were enough people using WhatsApp or using other services similar that did not find the need to switch over to this, because for us to then communicate using Sasai chat, we would then need to tell someone or a friend in the diaspora, whatever, I'm communicating on this, right? For example, if you've got an iPhone, iMessage is going to solve that problem. If the other person's got an iPhone as well, which you don't really see a lot of people using iMessage, or
but doesn't that but if you are using it for free, is that not like
yeah, it is a benefit, right?
yeah.
Uh, because it exists, it's in the phone, and blue bubble versus green bubble, FOMO, whatever the case might be. If you have people who use, I've personally got 4 contacts who've got iMessage. The rest I don't know, right? But our commonality is WhatsApp, because it has offered us this whole ecosystem of well, not transacting, because we don't have WhatsApp Pay, of communicating, of shopping, of whatever, right? Sasai was the same. Problem, I believe, was it was a super app. They didn't, in my opinion, do enough, try to understand their market, to see the products they're already using, to say, is this something that is this built within the habits of the people who we intend to use it, right? As much as we own a telecoms company and a mobile money operator, right? Those things were necessary. People actually needed those things. I think with the first 18 months of EcoCash's existence, it had more users than all the bank accounts combined. Right? right? Because people needed an easier access to financial
Yeah.
services, of which made sense. Econet as a mobile network operator, again, boomed simply because they were a lot more innovative in a space that was well traded upon elsewhere. But in this space of chat and social media, whatever you want to call it, the app as a super app was too big. I gave this example a while back. It's like if the entire Google suite, all the products in Google, were in one program.
Yeah.
You can't separate. I just want to use this. I don't want to see the rest of this. I just want to use the chat functionality. They didn't allow the users to experience the very unique aspects of the products that they had, because at the time we were battling internet prices, Sasai should have been the chat platform we're using, but because there was some friction with users, or let me say with users, with my experience and the people I've spoken to, it didn't translate well. Then they started adding stuff like Sci Pay. Now, in a world where we want e-commerce to exist in Zimbabwe, that makes sense because you're putting chat functionality with Pay before WhatsApp could do it in what's it called in Africa, or let's say in Zim. You put all those very functional, very good things within it. You put a COVID passport. You put all of these things, right? You integrated EcoCash and all those other things that you've got going on continentally. It still didn't catch on
Okay.
locally, because even in my context, I think there are 4 people, and of those 4 people, they've been dormant
Yeah.
on the platform to keep up with it.
But I feel like that's more of a reason than the first one that you mentioned, because don't people use Telegram, for instance? Because I've got Telegram, and so I don't text anyone on Telegram, but I've got it installed in my phone, and almost every day now I get a Ningi joined Telegram. This person joined Telegram.
But
This
has that been
person
enough for you to use Telegram?
No,
You
but
said-
I know people that like use it religiously,
Fair enough.
right? But the point is like, but I don't know a single person that uses Sasai.
I know.
I
a few
know
people.
I know someone that downloaded it, but I don't, I don't know anyone that has used it. So yeah, like, and the people that downloaded it was like, okay, let's see what is this beast called. So let's just kind of check it out.
Mm.
But so yeah, I don't know. I guess I feel like what the second reason that you gave is more appealing to me,
Hmm.
because it seems like like you're saying, I didn't think that they didn't have enough time to like actually understand what people wanted,
Yep.
and that seems to be the problem across. Because I'm gonna talk. Let's talk about like Via, because right now InDrive just got into the market,
Mm.
and they've overtake them, right?
Mm.
And usually, the when I think when Via came out, the assumption that I heard from people was like, well, people would say people don't really have data to download apps, and people don't really want to use this and all of that. But then here's InDrive.
Mm.
Everyone is using InDrive now.
So there are assumptions made by people or Zimbabwean tech fundis. There are a lot of assumptions that are made that people don't have money to buy airtime. And the people don't have money to buy airtime. Because an example is in 2018, I saw this lady on Ed Street where Miko Hotel is. She is selling. She's got one of those Pepsi cards, those Varun cards.
Yeah.
Varun at the time, or maybe I'm getting my dates mixed up. But she was watching YouTube on her phone.
Yeah.
So the assumption you get, the north of Samora assumption, let me use that term loosely. The north of Samora assumption is people in south of Samora are not going to be able to buy airtime. No. People
Yeah.
have money for it, right?
Otherwise, Mighty Do wouldn't be famous. Right?
Exactly. That's the principle. That's exactly what it is. The thing that's true is that there are bundles, right? Yes, that is true. But to assume that people won't be able to afford to buy, if it fills a need, people
Yeah.
will make the time and money. I think we overlook the amount of effort people will put into something if it's going to be a net positive for them.
Yeah.
Like Vibe, who thought it wouldn't take off or wouldn't whatever, because the general assumption is that Zimbabwe is poor. No, there are people who are comfortable in Zimbabwe, not millionaires, thousandaires and hundredaires, who don't mind spending the money if this solves a problem. There are people I know who don't like driving, who see the cost of owning a vehicle as like, yeah, I might as well just use rideshare rather than me having to do all of these things. So yeah, Via is an interesting case study because Via is tried to be Uber too much.
Yeah.
And again, it's Econet or Econet Group, and please don't hate me. I've said this to people who work there already.
Yeah.
So whatever. Econet Group makes a mistake all the time. And I don't know if it's of their own fault or they don't have a sustainable partner in the market, but I think the last reason is probably less true. They try to solve every problem by themselves. which
Exactly.
again, this is striving is money. So whatever he wants to do this money, knock yourself out, right? Again, but this is the R&D process talking about it. Like he's willing to take
Yeah.
those risks, right? But in my opinion, it's you had guys like Windy in the market and a bunch of other, taxi companies and whatnot. Maybe they had engagements with them and they fell through, right?
Yeah.
Right? Which would be one
Well.
assumption to make
Yeah.
the argument fair. Or on the other side, they said, no, we can do the same thing that they're doing because we brought these innovations
Yeah,
that we're
and
able
we've
to.
got a larger
You
network.
see,
But yeah, that always kind of gets me all the time.
because we try
That
and
they have all this, sort of network to leverage from, and they also can bankroll anything, right?
but in my line of work, right, a business can have data, but what are you actually doing with that data? Are you getting closer to understanding your customer with that data, or are you not? Because you could go and ask someone who's been in business for 20 years, has got, let's say, 10,000 recurring customers, and say, do you know the profile of your customer? And they'll be like, people just come and buy, why don't we
Yeah.
actually it? And it's like, no, how are you going to improve the product or whatever offering you have to the point that you're catering specifically to their immediate needs, as well as being able to forecast their future needs and are
Yeah.
able to stay ahead of trends?
It's like being a president or a political candidate and
Exactly.
ignoring the people that are supposed to vote for you.
Yes,
It doesn't work, right?
it
Like,
doesn't.
yeah, you might have the best ideas than all your candidates. You might be the perfect one,
Mm,
but no one is going to care if you don't actually talk to them, right?
exactly.
And they don't have that relationship with you. So it's always interesting to me but like, to your point about like actually working with other people, you also find that model a lot with, again, US companies
Mm,
being the benchmark here. Facebook buys Instagram. I mean, they let them still do it the way that they did, but you have those acquisitions, but you also have incubations of certain ideas or
mm.
certain companies. I also kind of wrote something a while back because I was always, at the time, you had all these companies saying, we just opened an innovation hub, but to me, it just sounded like one of those things. They were just stuck in the buzz of it. And so, what do you think should be the relationship between Zimbabwean startups and corporates? Is there any relationship between the two? And if not, what do you think the remedy would be? Because I think every bank at this point is an innovation hub. um you know
Okay.
but what actually are they? And
So
then, like, to your point and Harvey's point,
mm,
they just end up becoming cafes, right?
I was about to actually say the greatest innovation happened in Zimbabwe were cafes with free Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
A lot of startups, a lot of the early startups in Zim, late 2000s, early 2010s, were started around Zoll Sports, Chili Sports, and whatnot. A lot of people's exposure to doing business in a different way or starting ideas or building software collaboratively because you meet like-minded people in those places. I remember we used to go to Zoll Sports a lot of times because my affinity is not towards software development, I'm more behind the software development scene. But you see these interesting ideas, people building these little projects and whatnot. That's where it eventually began. On the point of banks and innovation hubs, let's start with innovation hubs themselves. Like you said, they become cafes, they become places where are rented out for events and stuff like that because they can't sustain because of lack of funding. Innovation hubs actually need money. It's not they do co-working spaces and whatever to generate revenue, but they need money outside to keep the space going. And I actually
Yeah.
applaud those guys who've kept pushing in that direction, but still with the mandate of bringing people together, like what we used to have back in the day,
Yeah.
or wherever businesses began before we had those endeavors. To the point of banks and other corporates only opening up innovation hubs, I have two thoughts on this. Cheap R&D, because if Jabulo owns an innovation hub and I come with Jabulo's idea, or I'm a co-working space, and then one of Jabulo's staff comes to me and says, "Yo, bro, what are you working on?" And I explain this idea. This is really interesting for a company. Why don't you come and do this? Because you worked out a considerable amount of the problem that they hadn't figured out to some degree or another, but it's not within the context of how the business operates, right?
Yeah.
So they are able to uptake a lot of ideas from that. I'm not saying Old Mutual's doing that, but their value creation challenge, a lot of them are really aimed towards what Old Mutual does in its core business. A good number of them, which I think is cool because I'm spending money, therefore I must get return for the money I'm spending.
Yeah.
If it's pure altruism, then it's a different situation. But I think number one is cheap R&D because you get a lot of young people who are exposed to ideas who can then feed back into whatever that's doing. I'm not saying that's what's happening there, but when I see these hackathons and whatnot and the kind of money that's up there for some of the really complex and intricate ideas, I'm like, it's cheap R&D. The second thing is corporate social responsibility. they can put this on their CSRs, like, oh, we helped 100 innovators, do this.
Mm.
Helped is enough of a word to put on a CSR bump. What material benefits are you able to give them besides the space to work and probably internet? Again, curious. Another thing is why I think besides the value creation hub and old mutuals hub, and I might be mistaken on this, but I've not seen any other that publishes reports on what they've done this year,
Yeah.
reports on the number of enterprises they've dealt with. I know we have a lot of reports going on the continent. I don't know which organization was doing it, but somewhat of an audit of this joint hub that's across Africa to try and see what impact have we driven, right? We don't see stuff like that. Maybe they do them internally and then give them to their funders and investors, maybe. But that way you can trace. Sorry, that's a take up uh, what's it called, a startup. That's an Igbo Hub startup. That's a, those kind of things.
Yeah.
We know the Tech Village kids, your True Measures, your Media Energies and whatnot, because at the time it was still a very nascent idea at the time to, but they were associated with what was going on with Tech Village. I don't know if Tech Village documented it because I wasn't paying attention to them at the time, but there is a thing, maybe it's coming from Malawi where it's significantly smaller city than Harare, and people are more closely and tightly knit. I don't know what the case may be, but we don't have reports, and something that we're working on at Dr. W, to be honest, try and understand where are these startups coming from? Where are they going? Can we even classify whatever's happening in tech in Zimbabwe as a startup, or should we now just call each other SMEs?
Yeah, I mean that's the big question that we need to answer. And after also having been interacted with a lot of these hubs and you know in within the I've also seen there seems to be a trend, at least from the ones that I know who have always been on this journey. There seems to be a trend of actually going out of the country.
Mm.
Some uh, Zambia, some go to South Africa, some go to Kenya, Rwanda, and so forth. So what do you think we should do differently? What would be if you were the president of technology in Zimbabwe, what would you do, like, to kind of you know chatter the direction of the tech ecosystem?
I wrote an article about this after Trevor Noah's Ideas Festival when innovators went on stage and expressed their problems, and most people in the room looked shocked. I'm like,
Yeah.
why do you look shocked? I mean, fair enough, most of them are boomers and they've already made their money and they're on the 11th property and are on full passive income mode where, waking
Yeah.
up every morning to see your grandchildren is what you do. And fair enough,
Yeah.
they've earned it. But they were shocked. Like, yo, like people are actually suffering through these problems.
Yeah.
And when people talk about brain drain in Zim, they mostly talk about maybe more blue collar than white collar work, right? That people are actually fleeing the country to go and seek opportunities elsewhere. People, white collar people, becoming blue collar and whatnot. But we're not seeing the what my friend Harvey calls the tech debt we've actually ensued as a country. Most of our most prominent startups are not Zimbabwean based. And the problems, and if I was the president of technology in Zimbabwe,
Yeah.
the biggest thing is not enacting a startup act. I'll be perfectly honest with you right now. A startup act, if it's constructed in the way that most Zimbabwean legislation is constructed, it will not work. Not it will not work.
Yeah,
It'll
I
be
mean, I always have a problem with people that think, as soon as AI comes, we need like an AI, national AI framework or policy.
mm,
As soon as something comes, we need a cybersecurity bill and all that. Fair and fine, but I always feel like, isn't that jumping the gun though?
it's not. It's the natural progression of innovation and then policy coming. Because remember, whatever scorecards are happening out there in governments, people are scorecard and say this innovation came, therefore we're able to draft a policy for it to stay ahead. Because typically policy takes a lot longer to catch up to innovation. But even if a cybersecurity the bills come out, innovation will be far ahead anyway. But again, the thing is, someone has got a scorecard that they need or a report card that needs to be ticked
But
off.
that's my point. Isn't it supposed to be the other way around?
I think it's
Where you actually also do, because like you're saying, like, people are starting to now talk about, you have, like, two groups within Silicon Valley right now when it comes to AI. You have, people that are more on the let's regulate AI. You could call them alarmist or whatever, but Elon Musk being one of those that are in that camp. Then you have people that are just saying, your Ray Kurzweils and stuff like that. So, like, but the point is, like, we're talking about this after the fact,
Mm.
and of course, like from their point of view, they're like, well, let's regulate so that we kind of anticipate for what is coming. But my point is like, isn't that you know shouldn't more focus be put on actually trying to understand or connect with tech startups that are doing stuff and helping them get to the next stage than us just focusing on just signing a piece of an act or whatever. I mean, I'm not discarding the fact that within an act or within a certain policy framework is actually articulated what let's say the startup ecosystem should look like,
Mm.
and putting those. But I always feel like it just sounds like for word salad, if that makes sense.
This is a
Like
word
people
salad.
just kind of stuff that people just say to sound cool, but not actually. You know,
So um,
it's a replacement of action. In other words,
it's actually the point I was going to hit is America doesn't have a startup act as far as I understand. I don't think they have one. Um, uh, South Africa doesn't have a startup act, although they're working towards one. But they've got a lot of startups. Nigeria recently got a startup act, but they're one of the most. They before that they were amongst the most funded
yeah,
territory on the continent. Kenya again recently got it, I think it was 2020. But even before then, they were still heavily funded, even without the
yeah.
legislation that exists. I'll use the America example if I'm correct. I don't think the last time that they actually have startup legislation. What are the problems? What are the key issues that businesses in let's say Zimbabwe have? Is number one cost of compliance, right? Um, I think in Rwanda you can open a business at no cost, and it will be issued in the same day. South Africa you can do it online using CPIC. Minor cost there, and they have to get an accountant or a consultant to do it, whatever the case might be. Opening a business um, should not be a scary or a long, time-consuming or expensive process, right? Much in the same way, birth certificates, passports, again, should not. It's not special. It's a document from a government, right? Let's bring down the order of importance of some of these things. That's why we got such informalization, because the cost and time, you be like, okay, and then you go to your Zimmer. Again, I know that with terms they've kind of streamlined things, but you technically need someone who understands Zimmer systems and someone who's an accountant to kind of work that out. They know, as far as I understand, there are no direct integrations with accounting softwares people use, right? Which most people are now using accounting software, or if you're on Excel, more part to you. Um, Compliance. It needs to be cultural, as it is in the United States, that opening a company is not something that should take 17 people to agree and sign and come off. It should be something that should be very simple to do, right? Um, Local registration. Again, you've got the state level compliance and you've got local compliance. Your city of area, if you go to your example, your retail shops, you see all these framed plaques on the wall with, oh, this regulated this.
Yeah.
Some of them important, health and whatnot, safety important. Something you're like, okay, why is someone doing this? And then take that to a scale of an SME who's downtown in Kabuli Street, who's doing the same thing and needs to comply to essentially the same amount of people who want to keep. The hands are too many on the meager incomes that SMEs and startups are making. There are too many people wanting too much money from this point, right? There are a lot of again, it's also equally not fair to the big companies like an Econet, because I think in one of their reports, the 2020, where they said I think they spent to a third, or is it something like that, a ridiculous proportion of their revenue for compliance costs, right? Fair. Compliance is a big problem. If I was president of technology, we would streamline compliance. I understand from a revenue collection perspective, the country needs to make money. But there's so many other places you can get money that's not being extracted funds from right now.
Or from the actual people that you are
Exactly.
regulating to death.
Yes. So if you're strangling the businesses, particularly those small and nascent businesses that are going to build the pillars of, or the build the foundation of your whatever industrial 4.0, even though it's another buzzword,
Yeah.
if you're inhibiting, and for example, it's a more case of reindustrialization after the deindustrialization of the 90s and the 2000s. If we are going to do that, the compliance costs need to come down. That's the first thing. I don't need an act to do that. We need to have an agreement with the relevant ministries and authorities to streamline that. The other thing is finance. It's hard to get money in Zim. This is why you see capital flight from startups. When they raise money, if you've been in these conversations, There is no serious fund that was going to ship you money to Zim. They will
Mm-mm.
say either open an enterprise like what many startups in Zimbabwe and South, not even Zimbabwe, in Africa we're doing Delaware because for them it's an easier system for them and it brings you under their jurisdiction. The Zimbabwean entity might actually shut down entirely or become a subsidiary
Mm.
of this wholly owned Delaware institution or this Delaware entity. I understand there are issues like foreign currency externalization, all this kind of stuff, but again, why is money so hard? Why is it so difficult for money to come into Zim is a question. I know there's an issue of grey listing, sanctions, and whatever might be the case, right?
Yeah.
But that's a question that needs to be asked, and we don't need an act.
We don't.
It's done Ministry of Finance, Reserve Bank, right? I know an act simplifies it because it brings them underneath the single umbrella. But if they don't understand from the context this is coming from, the enforcement and the progression and iteration of the policies within their own departments will become difficult. Again, I have not mentioned Startup Act at all in all of this. It's
Yeah.
all departments of government, Ministry of Industry and Trade, Commerce, and all those guys. How are we making it easier for those startups that need to or import, export, move goods around, whatever the case might
Yeah.
be? I mean, this e-commerce is an example. How have we made it easier for logistics startups in Zim to exist? What is the licensing like for logistics startups? How again, those are things you don't need an act for. You just need to say our objectives within these individual departments is to work on compliance, work on preventing capital flight
Exactly.
and capital existing in pools outside that are exactly Zimbabwean money. The most important thing, if I was president of technology, would be revenue collected today, as necessary as it is. Right? The example is the 2% tax. If I'm squeezing you for every transaction, you're more likely going to find ways out of it. There needs to be a longer term approach to how you collect revenue. It's down the line. This person is we're going to end up getting that money down the line.
Yeah.
We don't need to get them where we've got them because it's not like you're hunting where
Yeah.
bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It's not that archaic. There are other areas where people can pay and incentivizing again, which is digital payments. Because without digital payments, 90% of what people are trying to do with startups don't work. Because you need to be able to pay. I think with Beyond Pay now, Conti Pay, it's a very small click, Pay, very small click of payment gateways in Sim. And their journeys to getting to that point are harrowing because they had to
Yeah.
penetrate
I mean,
these
I
traditional institutions.
spoken to Pesape. Yeah. It's definitely a struggle. I mean, it kind of reminds me of something that I always tell people. Like, when you are talking about a startup ecosystem, it's not enough to just like have discussions with startups. You want to have discussions with people in government.
Hmm.
You want to have discussions with everyone who's sort of relevant to the conversation. Like you're saying, it might not be something that like people would think about is essential for startups, like for the compliance thing or registration or things like that. Might come as an afterthought because people are sort of focused, especially when it comes to tech startups.
Hmm.
People are sort of focused on the finer details. But yeah, I definitely agree with you.